your belief and love of religion.
But the other thing about that is that, like, imagine that there's a pathological mode of being that's so terrible that when you enact it, you just die. A good drug addiction will do that for you if you pursue that. Meth addiction, pursue that for about 10 years, you know, and you'll descend to the lower levels of hell and then you'll die. Right. Well, so then you might say, well, what's at the opposite end of that? What would be the final manifestation of a mode of life that was revivifying and healthy? How redemptive and rejuvenating would that be? And I would say the answer to that is that we don't know. We have no idea. And these ideas of death and rebirth are definitely true on the micro level. Like, so the developmental psychologist Piaget said, for example, that when you incorporated new information, however you did that, learning or conversation, that new information would exist in contradiction to something that you already presumed. And so that thing you presumed would have to disintegrate and die. And then something new would be born. That can happen at different levels of analysis. So sometimes you learn something minor. And sometimes you're shook to your bloody core, you know, and you undergo a descent into the underworld fundamentally, sometimes even a descent into hell. That's where you get genocidal and resentful. And then maybe you're lucky and you pop up reborn. Well, those exist as constant metaphysical truths. That's how human beings transform. And we don't know the upper limits of that transformation. We have no idea what that might be. Because I don't know, for example, how healthy you could be if you were as healthy as you could be. If you straightened yourself out completely. I don't know what limits you could transcend, and neither does anybody else. So we don't know the upper limits of the truth of these religious stories. Now we do know what happens if you let go of them too badly. You end up with something like the Soviet Union, or Mao's China.
Which were both based on, I mean, they were atheist.
Yeah, they were secular. They were, they dispensed, you know, for Marx, religion was the opiate of the masses. It's not like I don't understand that. I understand that. But it's another one of those situations where it's like, religion is the opiate of the masses. Yeah, and it's also 50 other things. And you don't want to forget those, like, really we know, for example, from anthropological studies, religious belief is a human universal. And the reason for that in part is because there is a distinction between good and evil. And there is a distinction between good and bad. Otherwise, you wouldn't do anything. Like, you're always striving for the good. I mean, unless you've taken a malevolent turn. It's a natural impulse in human beings to make what is better. Well, it means we have a deeply inbuilt sense of what constitutes better.
And we're all aware of that harmonious state that's achieved in community.
And the thing that's interesting about it, like one of the things that Nietzsche thought was, after he announced the death of God, was that people would be able to create new values. And Carl Jung took issue with that. He was a student of Nietzsche's, and he pointed out basically that, well, wait a minute. Who says you can create your own values? You can't even get yourself out of bed to go exercise in the morning. You're not under your own control. Maybe we could rediscover the values that we once held. And that's the descent into the underworld and the resurrection of the father. That's what happens in Pinocchio, for example. You know, when Pinocchio goes down into the depths to face Monstro and revitalize his dead father. There's a reason that movie was made in the 1930s and why it was so popular. It's like, you want to get rid of your damn strings and stop being a neurotic jackass. That's what the story's about, is you go down to the bottom of the ocean, you find the thing you're most afraid of, you face it, you rescue your dead father from the depths, and you rise back to the surface with him. That's what our culture has to do. That's what our culture has to do.
Now, when you say that you're a religious person, though, people automatically assume that there's, especially in this country, the religious right. There's a very dogmatic and very simplistic view of what God wants, and it's lumped into no homosexuals, certain restrictions on the behavior of women. If you look at the Bible, and the Bible is obviously a reflection of the people that lived at the time where it was constructed, although even trying to figure out when that is, you know, it was an oral tradition for thousands of years before it was ever written down, written in ancient Hebrew, translated to Latin and Greek and Roman, or in English, rather.
Well, there's always a tension in religions between the dogmatic element and the spiritual element.
Right.
And conservatives, technically speaking, tend to marshal themselves on the sides of the more rule-oriented and dogmatic elements of the religion, and liberals, roughly speaking, tend to marshal themselves more on the spiritual side.
And that's because of the distinction that you were saying earlier about the behavior patterns of people that tend to be conservative.
Yeah, it's conscientiousness versus openness, roughly speaking. And I mean, the dogmatic structures are necessary. The dogma is necessary because it conserves the structure. But the spiritual aspect is necessary because it updates the structure. And there's always this tension, and there's a tension in people. It's like you have to believe things or you couldn't exist, you couldn't act. You have to hold on to the dogmatic structure of your belief, but you have to be open for its update on a continual basis. And that's basically what consciousness is for. That, seriously speaking, consciousness is the thing that attends to the unknown and to the anomaly and integrates it with the structure. And there's meaning to be found in that too. That's to boldly go where no one has gone before, you know, in the words of the Star Trek writers. And something that deeply appeals to young people when they watch that sort of thing. But so what the fundamentalists are doing is they're trying to hold on to their tradition. And it's no bloody wonder, because if the tradition falls apart, you end up isolated and drowning in the ocean alone. But if the tradition gets too intense and restricted, well then you're just clones in a prison. And that's these two forms of hell. In a sense, they meet. You know, if they get extreme enough, they meet. The hell of absolute chaos and the hell of absolute order. And the conservatives tend towards the hell of absolute order, and the left liberal types tend towards the hell of absolute chaos. There's some point in the middle. That's the line between yin and yang, by the way, because that's order and chaos. And the Taoists say, well, that's life, that's existence, order and chaos. And order is the place you are when what you do works. And chaos is where you are when what you do doesn't work. And no matter where you go, order and chaos exist, and your job is to be right on the border between those. And that's to live in Tao, that's to live in meaning, and that's that same place where all these things stack up. And so with regards to religious tradition, on the one hand, you have to maintain the tradition. It's like maintaining the Constitution in the US. On the other hand, you have to be awake and alert, because the tradition is a dead thing, right? It was composed by dead people in the dead past. It can't respond as flexibly as it should to the demands of the present. That's up to you, and you do that with your vision, with your capacity to see, and with your capacity to articulate. And forever, really, the major deities that mankind have produced, Marduk for the Mesopotamians, and Osiris or Horus for the Egyptians, and Christ for the Christians, and Buddha for the Buddhists. These have been people who are noted for their vision, for their ability to watch and pay attention, because there's nothing more important than the ability to pay attention. Pay attention and speak the truth, your truth. And that's how you keep everything stacked up in order harmoniously. That's how you keep the balance between order and chaos. That's how you articulate your being. That's how you revivify the world. That's how you rescue your dead father from the bottom of the ocean. That's how you adopt your responsibility as a citizen. That's how you live a proper life. And a proper life, I know what a proper life is, because I've thought about this for a long time. Life is suffering. And suffering can make you resentful, murderous, and then genocidal if you take it far enough. So you need an antidote to suffering. And maybe, you could think, well, I'll build walls of luxury around myself and that'll protect me from the suffering. It's like, well, good luck with that, because that isn't going to work. And maybe you could build a delusion and live inside that, but that's going to fall apart. Well, what is there that helps you fight against suffering? That's easy. That's the truth. The truth is the antidote to suffering. And the reason for that is because the truth puts reality behind you, so that you can face the reality that's coming straight at you without becoming weak and degenerating and becoming resentful and wishing for the destruction of being. Because that's the final hell. The final hell is your soul wishing for the destruction of everything because it's too painful and you're too bitter. And that happens to people all the time.
Now, as a person who